Hello, this is the staff of the Altamont Enterprise and Albany County Post gathered together around our table in what has become an annual tradition. I have with me reporters who know more about this part of Albany County than anyone else in the world. And we are going to take a Janus-faced look. Janus, of course, was the Roman god of beginnings and endings, but he looked both ways on the gate. And these reporters are going to be sharing some of their top stories of the year, talking about how they found them, what they meant, and maybe taking a little look forward to how those issues that they've delineated so well may play out in 2020. So just to introduce around the table, because sometimes this will turn into a round table, even though it's rectangular, with other people chiming in. We have Noah Zweifel, who our long-term readers will know is new to us this year. H. Rose Schneider has gone on from covering the Hilltowns to covering cops in courts for the daily newspaper in Utica, and we are delighted to have Noah covering the Hilltowns. We have Sean Mulkerrin, who covers New Scotland, both the villages of Altamont and Voorheesville, and also takes long looks at issues. And last but certainly not least, we have Elizabeth Floyd Mair, born and raised and so knowledgeable about Guilderland that it's beyond measure. So we're going to start with Noah, who's going to tell us about some of the stories that he has covered since he's been here that he feels are important.
So the first story, one of the first stories I did was Knox's multi-use residential district, proposed multi-use residential district, which was voted on and rejected at the first town hall meeting that I ever went to while here at this paper. It was voted down 3-2. It required a supermajority vote because the proposal was rejected by the Albany County Planning Board, who cited negative environmental impacts as well as an inconsistency with the town's comprehensive plan, which was the issue that Earl Barcombe, one of the Democrats on the town board, raised with it also. Earl Barcombe and Dennis Barber were the ones who voted against the proposal. What was great about that story was that it was obviously a major update in a really significant process for the town, which has been seeking to improve business opportunities for many years. This story began 3 years ago when Supervisor Vasilios Lefkaditis attempted to rezone the area as a business district, and then a few years down the line reformed it as a multi-use residential district. And I think what was exceptionally nice about that story was that the personalities of all the major players really came through in that town hall meeting. Lefkaditis was very critical of many audience members. Earl Barcombe had a lot of kind of sly asides, and Bridget McAuliffe, who was one of the residents most critical of the proposal, spoke up a lot. And an important component of that story was delving into her background. She had issues in the past in other states living near businesses that contaminated her well water, and then she ultimately brought to court and got a settlement through that. And I don't know if any of those issues came up in prior meetings, so I think that was a really important addition to people learning about that story.
So Noah, if you look forward, because we're Janus-based here, what do you see happening with the MRD in 2020?
So Earl Barcombe and Dennis Barber both lost their re-election campaigns to Dennis Sear and June Springer, who are part of Lefkaditis' slate. They're not Republicans, but they were backed by the GOP, and they are supportive of a rezoning. It'll be interesting, I guess, to see whether they're going to try and revive the same proposal, or if they're going to alter it in some way. I would guess not, because really Barber and Barcombe were the only obstacles for them. I mean, if they can get a supermajority approval, then it doesn't matter what the Albany County Planning Board thought about it.
Also, they've reconfigured the district, haven't they, to take out, like, the McAuliffe parcel, but many of the residents in that district didn't want it, and so they've kind of done a patchwork, right?
Yeah, and that's what Earl Barcombe's concern was. He was very clear that he's not against business, but that he just didn't feel that the residents who lived in that area and who it would affect the most were supportive of it. And so he was just looking for another path.
And so you've also selected another story to talk about. This is in the neighboring town of Berne in the Hilltowns. Tell us about that.
So Joel Wilsey, who's a Democrat on the board, has long been critical of the way the highway department, whose superintendent is Randy Bashwinger, who is also the head of the Berne GOP. Wilsey has written many letters to the editor, displayed various slideshows at the town hall meetings outlining the concerns that he has with the roads. And Bashwinger has, I guess, been very, very sensitive to that criticism and has retaliated against Wilsey by opening all sorts of investigations into conduct. For instance, I think probably the most strange one is that he requested that a sexual misconduct investigation take place after Wilsey, in an email about campaign signs, he said something along the lines of campaign signs were erected in such a manner, and Bashwinger pulled out the word erection or erected and tried to put it in a more sexual context and accused Wilsey of being inappropriate. So it's kind of a hostile environment on the town board, and this road evaluation has been proposed by Wilsey, where an outside engineer comes to look at the roads, find some issues, help guide the highway department in solving them most efficiently, was kind of another symbolic attack in Bashwinger's eyes on his political status. So that in itself was interesting, but what we discovered in looking into the story was that a few months ago, a municipal consultant was hired, an outside party, who was brought in to help the town streamline its budget and come up with more accurate projections for years going forward, which allowed the town to decrease taxes while increasing spending, which Lyons was very proud of, but he didn't acknowledge the help he received from the consultant when I spoke with him around the time the budget was passed. But when I spoke with the consultant earlier this month, he told me that he received no cooperation from Randy Bashwinger, who, as the highway superintendent, controls the majority of the town's budget. More than 50% of the town's overall budget goes to the highway department.
But the town board has to approve it. They hold the purse strings.
Right.
Yeah, so it makes a point of friction.
And that was really good because we've been covering Berne a long time, and it's a lot of back and forth, and mostly the relevant parties are, involved in one way or another on a personal level. Either they're a town board member or, they're in the mix somehow. But having this outside consultant was really helpful in establishing a foundation for us to balance these opposing perspectives on. And I mean, he was pretty clear in his decision on who acted in what way and what was appropriate and what was not. So that was really good.
So if you look forward to 2020, tell us what's going to happen to the board then and what might unfold.
So similar to Knox, Berne's election brought a new ideological majority to the board. So Wilsey will be the only Democrat until his reelection 2 years from now, if he decides to run again. In that time, he'll probably be completely paralyzed and unable to get any of his issues addressed, so long as Bashwinger is the highway superintendent and public sentiment, as it currently does, remains to rest in Bashwinger's arena.
Well, thank you, Noah. And now we're going to move on to Sean, who has done some deep dives on legal cases.
Yeah, it has been a litigious year where the outcome is actually seen at the ballot box quite a bit. In Voorheesville, going back to November, almost when I started here, November 2017, Coach Robert Berne filed a lawsuit where he claimed that he was fraudulently induced to resign his job because he was accused of, in one way or another, harassing or inflicting. He told a girl he was going to, if I had a gun, I'd shoot you. And there were these other allegations that had come along where he was a strong-willed coach who had tendencies where he was kind of an old-school coach who was harder on the players than they're used to. So that's how he played. That's how he was a coach. So that
he had a very successful team that was
Yes.
kind of revered by the community.
Yeah. So in November 2017, a player went to the administration and said that what had happened was he had said that if I had a gun, I'd shoot you. Berne subsequently was brought in, told he was put on administrative leave. Eventually he was let go. However, he wasn't actually let go. He ended up resigning so he could save face. Fast forward, he ended up suing because he claimed that he was fraudulently induced to resign because when they went to investigate the claim, they only talked to 2 people instead of the entire team. Now, as we're coming forward to this year, we have court filings going back and forth. We're up to the point of partial discovery where there are new things being included in these filings, such as allegations of the girls who were the ones who claimed that Berne was harassing them in some way. Those same girls were also have claimed to have been bullies and bullying other teammates. There were claims that they had written signs that said F. Berne. There were other allegations of, intimidation of the team. But where this played out at the ballot box was the school board became very unpopular because of the way that the people in the Voorheesville School District saw this as being handled. And the school board president, Doreen Saya, who was up for re-election, not only lost, she lost very, very badly. She lost by almost 3-1 margin to Rachel Gilker, who she is a constant presence at school board meetings. She had actually kind of rode a wave of anti-incumbent sentiment to a degree. She had actually had backing of the Voorheesville Teachers Union, which was odd because they'd never come out for anyone. So there was a lot of anti-incumbent sentiment, and Saya was eventually pushed out. Now, going forward with the Berne thing, with the new superintendent in place, there might be some movement going forward now in the new year. As for the there are elections in 2020. If the same anti-incumbency seems to be, that coalition seems to be holding strong, that Jeannie McDonald and I think Diana Strott are up. So I think that they will have difficulty going forward if those are the two. I can't remember exactly. But whoever the incumbents are going to have difficulty going forward. There's a definite anti-incumbent sentiment, and there is a block of people who will show up to vote them out. Our other litigious, here in the village of Altamont, there was a group of citizens, the Severson neighbors. They sued the village of Altamont over a rezone. 107-109 Helderberg Ave was rezoned from residential to commercial. Thank you. So that Stewart's could expand. The concerned Severson neighbors, they filed a lawsuit, an Article 78 lawsuit, claiming that the way the village board went about the process was illegal. They claimed that the village board had segmented their review when they approved the rezone. They only considered part of it. They only considered the rezone on paper, the actual, from residential to commercial. They didn't consider the construction impact when they did that. So that was considered segmentation. The other part was they didn't properly do the state environmental review. Subsequently, it was spot zoning. They were accused of spot zoning. That was thrown out. Also, another village election came along in March where there was another anti-incumbency mood, but the two members of the board, Nick Fahrenkoff, Michelle Ganance, they were challenged by two villagers who were anti-Stewarts. Fahrenkoff and Ganance, narrowly won. And to kind of remedy this lawsuit, the village board again voted to rezone the parcel of land at 107 and 109 Helderberg Ave in such a way where they properly rezoned it, and they did it in a way that was consistent with the lawsuit in the proper way, so they kind of negated the lawsuit. So now Stewart's has the land rezoned properly, and they were recently before the zoning board looking for 3 variances, and they will be presenting probably at the end of the month to the zoning board and to the planning board an actual plan for building. Stewart's is also suing the village of Voorheesville over the village's comprehensive plan and rezoning. Voorheesville rezoned their area around Smitty's to basically not allow Stewart's to build there. Stewart's also filed an Article 78 saying that was illegal, and right now that's in court. Going forward, the filings are coming forward.
Well, thanks, Sean. With the Altamont one, can you just take us a little back further in time? Because I get the feeling with corporations like Stewart's or Pyramid and Guilderland, which Elizabeth has written a lot about, they're able to wait and take time and eventually end up with what they want. So just tell us a little about the Stewart's history in Altamont, if you can.
Well, they had started in 2015. The original owner of the house, I think Frank Bauman, they had tried to work out a deal with him to basically do the same plan where they would move their shop back onto the land that he owned adjacent to where the current Stewart shop is right now on Altamont Boulevard. That went down to defeat in a 2-2 tie. It was a 2-2 tie, so therefore it went down. Stewart's kind of sat and waited for a bit. They eventually bought the property from Bauman. So since there was a new owner, they were able to go forward again and ask for a rezone because they were a new owner. And in addition, they also had a new board where they had a 3-2. They had I think there were 2 new board members who hadn't been on the board in 2015 who were pro-growth, who subsequently voted the first time in 2018 to rezone that property, and voted again in 2019 to give them the same rezone.
Thanks. So I guess we'll segue to Elizabeth, who has picked 2 stories to talk to us about.
So I picked a story that I thought there was something I could talk about that people wouldn't know about how the story came to be, that I thought might be interesting. It was the story that I wrote early this year about after the sentencing of Lynnwood teacher Tod Mell. So there was a story after the sentencing story. A lot of times the sentencing story is the end of it all. And you don't hear any more about that person after that. But in this case, after the sentencing story, there was
Just tell us a little about what he was accused of to tell people.
Okay, so Tod Mell was a long-time and beloved teacher at Lynnwood. He was a classroom teacher for a while, a long time. Then he was a math specialist, and he was accused by a young woman, of many years earlier having touched her inappropriately in the classroom over and over again throughout the year when she was 10. So she said that he would get her up next to his desk and put his arm around her, and then his arm would go down around where her thigh met her crotch area and kind of fondle around there and stuff and grope at her, the whole time talking to her in a normal way, like, so, did you do your homework, or whatever. So this went on 30 or 40 times at least, she said. And she had lived with it all that time, she said, but had never told anybody about it, not her parents, nobody. And there was a time when she was talking to a friend, and the friend said that Mr. Mell had been weird. And then she said, really? They started talking about it, and she said, well, what did he do, or whatever. And she found out that friend hadn't had the same experience that she had, but that she had gotten a weird vibe from him, and that he had touched her more often than she liked, but not in that same way. So this girl finally, after that conversation, had told her parents, she said, randomly in the car, she had told her father in a long car ride when she was in, I think, the back seat. Anyway, so we had tried, when we wrote the sentencing story, to get her point of view, to find out what had happened, because there was no information from anybody, the police or anybody, about the DA, about what had happened. What did she allege had happened? So we didn't know that. We couldn't get her victim impact statement. We couldn't get anything. We didn't know who she was. We had tried to find out who she was so we could offer her to tell her point of view without using her name. And we were unsuccessful in getting any of that. So we just kind of had the main story, the story that Mell and his lawyer were telling, which was, that Mell graciously, in order to preserve his family's dignity, had agreed to plead guilty to a misdemeanor endangering the welfare of a child, so that this whole thing would come to an end. And before the sentencing, the judge had received dozens of glowing letters about what a great teacher Mell was, and how unlikely it was that he would have done anything like this, and how it was strange that no one had seen anything in the classroom, because, how can you do something like that in a classroom and have nobody see it? So basically the girl must be lying, and, and he was sort of becoming the victim. And there wasn't any counter story to that. There wasn't any story in the media about, any other narrative. So after that story came out about the sentencing that included some of the words from the letters, including one was from now school board vice president Timothy Horan, a former teacher, who said that it was an example of Me Too McCarthyism, said that it was, girls can say anything about guys and have them be convicted. And also a long-time board member, Judy Slack, who was a former TA, she also spoke in support of Mell and asked that he should be able to keep his teaching license. Anyway, after that story came out, the victim's family, the victim and her family, came to us to ask us to tell their story. So that was great. It was, very moving and disturbing to hear her story, but it was really good to be able to put out a different narrative than the one that that he had been able to successfully keep as the only one for all that time, for about a year. So.
And you've done actually several stories where you have told the view of a victim that otherwise would not be heard. One that comes to mind was when there was a rape conviction of a student who had been sleeping in her dorm at Albany. You noticed a woman who attended regularly this trial and talked to her and discovered that her daughter years before had been a victim and told her story. And it's courageous for us to run them, as our libel lawyer is always telling us, because so often in the Me Too movement, people seem to think that you're protected when you tell those stories, but you're not. And it's so important, and you do it so well, getting those voices out to the public.
That woman, she was now a woman at the time when Franklin Cassatelli had allegedly raped her. She had been a girl, but she she had as often happens, it was a case where she was buying drugs at the time. She wasn't necessarily the most sort of reliable narrator. Like, people would be able to look at her and say, "Oh, she's just," and so she never did, wasn't able to bring any charges against him, and all those years ago that had happened, that had allegedly happened, and he went on to do this other thing at the University of Albany. So
both of those stories show is how, for the victim, it stays with them the rest of their lives. You captured that so well.
Yeah, it can be so damaging. So, yeah.
But you also have a story you're going to share with us that's on a happier note.
Right. This was a little random, but yes, I really liked writing the story about Christ Lutheran Church. Somebody had contacted us and said that there was the Christ Lutheran was closing, and that the church was closing, and that there was...
And you did the typical church closing story, which is sad.
Yes.
Members aging,
right.
Not enough of a congregation, but you found...
So we took pictures, of the small, older, elderly congregation, not many people quietly sitting there, and... the decision to close it down because it wasn't viable anymore. But we had learned from this phone call from, I think maybe it was your friend, that there was a much more active group that was also using the church once a week. So we looked into that, managed to find them, and they were very welcoming. So went out there and went to the church after being at the other service, which was quiet and very, very small. Got there and thought, this can't be the thing. There was like a loud rock band coming out, that you could hear as you approached, and it was like, wait, what? That can't be right. And it was this wonderful service of these people from Micronesia, which is like the area around like Saipan and Guam and stuff, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And all these people, there were about 100 people, all in the Guilderland area, the capital district, who have a very different approach to religion, very active and joyous,
and Elizabeth
jubilant.
Takes great pictures. They're dressed colorfully, and you even did a video, like a little boy proselytizing.
Little boys wearing little suits who get up on the altar and start screaming, praise the Lord. And it's a mixture of English, like praise the Lord, praise God, and also their language, and it was amazing. And actually, when I first got there, the priest said, like, you couldn't sneak in. The priest said, "Oh, well, welcome. We have a newspaper reporter here." He said, "You may not understand everything that we say, since a lot of it is in our own language, but just let the Spirit wash over you." And it was kind of wonderful. I mean, it made me want to join their church. I've never been back since then, because it would be too obvious. But if I could sneak in and not be seen, I would go to their church sometimes. It was great.
Thank you for staying with us, listening to us, and reading us, because without you, we wouldn't be able to cover these stories. And Happy New Year.